On the 15th of June 2010, the city of Derry, Londonderry in Northern Ireland was the focus of media attention from all over the world. TV reporters and a massive crowd massed outside the City Hall were expecting the publication of a long-awaited report into one of the most tragic and traumatic events of the Troubles, Bloody Sunday. Northern Ireland has a very complicated history. It was colonized by the English, like the rest of the island of Ireland, between the 12th and the 17th century. But while the rest of Ireland took its independence from the United Kingdom in 1921 and became the Republic of Ireland, 6 counties were singled out to remain in the UK and became known as Northern Ireland. Derry, or Londonderry, is the second largest city in Northern Ireland after Belfast. It is famous, among other things, for the dispute around its name. To put things simply, nationalists prefer to call it Derry, its original Irish name, while Unionists often prefer to use the name Londonderry, which was given to the city by a royal charter in 1613. It is also a city that has a large Catholic majority, and that is why it found itself at the centre of the Northern Ireland civil rights movement. In the late 1960s, the Catholics of Northern Ireland, who were about 1/3 of the population, began to protest against systemic discrimination in many areas: the attribution of housing, unemployment, treatment by the police forces, and the fact that the voting system in local elections was often designed to ensure Protestant control of areas that were, in fact, mostly Catholic. The civil rights protests were met with strong resistance from both the Protestant community and the state, and the situation quickly degenerated. On both sides, paramilitary groups were revived, like the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, or the UVF, the Ulster Volunteer Force. From 1969, Northern Ireland descended into violence. In an attempt to stop this escalation of violence, the government introduced a policy known as internment without trial. It meant that any person suspected of terrorist activity could be arrested without a warrant and imprisoned without a trial. Internment was a clear violation of civil rights, which the state justified by invoking the emergency of the situation. Hundreds of Catholics were arrested and imprisoned from August 1971. In reaction to this, the civil rights movement decided to organize a demonstration in the city of Derry, Londonderry, on the 30th of January 1972. The government banned the demonstration for security reasons, but the Civil Rights Association decided to defy this ban. In a fateful decision, the government sent the army to police the demonstration. But not just any army regiment. They sent the paratroop regiment, also known as the Paras. These soldiers were known for being extremely tough and trained for battle, not for policing demonstrations. The army planned a massive arrest operation, hoping that the illegal march would allow them to arrest some of the young people who regularly rioted in the city, or even to arrest paramilitaries. On the day, about 10,000 marchers assembled and made their way towards the city centre. The organisers had agreed to stay in the Catholic area of the Bogside and to avoid creating trouble in the city centre. There was some rioting when the crowd came into contact with army barriers, with many people throwing stones at the soldiers. However, the vast majority of the marchers were peaceful. The paratroopers then launched their arrest operation and entered the Bogside. Soon they started shooting live bullets at civilians. After 20 minutes, 13 people lay dead and 16 more injured. The victims were all men, except for 2 women who were among the injured. 7 of those who were killed were under 20 years of age. This event really shocked public opinion, not only in Northern Ireland, but all over the world. The army immediately claimed that they had only fired at snipers and bombers, after being fired upon first, but the many civilian witnesses categorically rejected that version of events. Whatever your position was, this required a political response. Thus, the British government immediately set up a public inquiry to look into the event. The first inquiry was conducted by a judge called Lord Widgery. It was done extremely quickly, in less than 3 months, and left out many civilian witnesses who wanted to give evidence. The Widgery report was seen as a whitewash, an attempt to exonerate the army instead of telling the truth. It placed the responsibility for the massacre squarely on the shoulders of the civil rights movement, instead of the army. This report was accepted by the British government, the British Parliament, and most of the British press. But it was a devastating blow to the victims' families. Bloody Sunday and the Widgery Inquiry had shattered what little trust there might have been between the nationalist community and the British state. The state's inability to acknowledge the facts and to provide redress for the victims left a highly toxic legacy. From the early 1990s, the victims' families began to campaign to get a second inquiry. During the same period, attempts to build a peace process were gathering momentum. In 1997, Tony Blair, the new British Prime Minister, made it clear that making peace in Northern Ireland was a priority for his government. The nationalist negotiators managed to convince Blair that granting the second inquiry into the Bloody Sunday issue was a necessary step to gain the trust of their community. In January 1998, the UK Parliament finally voted to set up a second inquiry into Bloody Sunday. The second inquiry was led by Lord Saville and lasted 12 years. The conclusions of the new report were published on the 15th of June 2010. They were completely different from those of the first inquiry. Lord Saville found out none of the victims had been posing a threat to the soldiers at the time when they were shot. And therefore they had all been shot without justification. On the day of publication, a huge crowd and hundreds of reporters gathered in front of the Guildhall in Derry, where the families of the victims were reading the conclusions of the Saville Report. The new British Prime Minister, David Cameron, gave a speech in which he officially apologised for Bloody Sunday, which he called unjustified and unjustifiable. The victims' families then came out of the Guildhall to massive applause from the crowd and proclaimed their loved ones innocent. The European Union did not play a direct part in the case of Bloody Sunday, but another European institution did, the Council of Europe, and in particular the European Convention on Human Rights. Article 2 of the Convention protects the right to life. This means a state has a duty to protect the lives of its citizens, but also in the cases when representatives of the state, such as policemen or soldiers, have killed their own citizens, the state has an obligation to hold an independent inquiry into what happened. Today, Article 2 is also being invoked to challenge a new piece of legislation passed by the British Parliament in September 2023, the Legacy Act. The Legacy Act was introduced by the Conservatives and aims to put an end to all troubles-related inquiries and prosecutions. In effect, it would be close to an amnesty for all soldiers and paramilitaries. The Legacy Act is, in part, a reaction to the attempts from the Bloody Sunday families to prosecute one soldier for murder, following the publication of the Saville Report. This soldier is known publicly only as Soldier F, and his trial is due to start in September 2025. The news of the prosecution of Soldier F has prompted outrage among the Protestant community and among British Conservatives, who insist that soldiers serving in Northern Ireland were only following orders and should not be individually prosecuted for their actions during the Troubles. However, victims of the Troubles have successfully challenged the Legacy Act. The Belfast High Court ruled in 2024 that the Act violated the right to life. Since then, the Labour Party has come back to power in the United Kingdom, and the new government led by Keir Starmer has promised to repeal the Legacy Act. The fight of the Bloody Sunday families is an example of a justice campaign forcing the British state to revise the official version of an event and to offer an apology. However, the recent controversies around prosecutions have shown that truth and apologies are often easier to obtain than justice. Justice remains a very divisive question in a society where there is no true agreement over how to interpret the past. Still, in spite of these difficulties, the peace process has endured, and the Saville Report and David Cameron's apology for Bloody Sunday are widely regarded as landmarks on the road to reconciliation.